3 weeks before everything fell apart, I was on top of the world, or so I thought. Vice president at a fast-growing tech firm, a corner office with skyline views, a fiance who called me his anchor, a mentor who said I was destined for more. I didn't know it then, but the cracks were already forming beneath me. The first sign was subtle, a meeting I wasn't invited to. Then came the whispers in the hallways, the unanswered emails, the once friendly glances that now darted away. I chalked it up to stress, market shifts, office politics. I told myself I was imagining things, but I wasn't. When the blow came, it was surgical. Restructuring, they said, not personal. But it was personal. The same CEO I'd helped build from a garage startup wouldn't even look me in the eye. My mentor? He avoided the room entirely. And my fiancé? He had been sleeping with my assistant for months. I found that out the same day I packed up my desk. They gave me 10 minutes to clear out. No send-off, no thank you. Just a cardboard box, a stack of unsigned NDA forms, and an HR rep who wouldn't meet my gaze. I walked out of that building with everything I owned in one hand and my dignity hanging by a thread. The California sun never felt colder. It wasn't just the job I lost. It was the identity I'd spent a decade building, the friends I thought I had, the man I thought I'd marry. But as I stood on that sidewalk with the city roaring past, I realized something terrifying and liberating. There was no one left to betray me. No one left to disappoint. All I had was $47, a keychain from my father, and a burning need to prove them all wrong. So I started walking, not toward anything yet, just away. Away from what they made me. Away from who I'd become trying to please them. Every step I took felt like shedding a layer of dead skin. That was the day I stopped surviving and started becoming dangerous. The days blurred together, a fog of cold nights and empty afternoons. It didn't take long for the world to collapse in on itself. My savings, pitiful as they were, evaporated faster than I'd imagined. I was late on the rent, then late on my phone bill, and before I knew it, I was crashing on a friend's couch. Or what used to be a friend. People don't disappear quietly. They drift, like ships in the fog, and when they're gone, you can't even hear the waves anymore. My calls went unanswered. Texts left unread. The people who once told me I was the one to watch suddenly found 1,000 excuses not to answer. They'd all ghosted me, every last one of them. Some I thought would never leave, and yet, here I was, alone. There were moments of clarity, sharp, brutal clarity, like when I stood at the corner of my old apartment building, looking up at the darkened windows. The same view that used to belong to me. Now, it was just an empty shell, as hollow as everything else I had lost. I thought about the woman I'd been. The woman who had a plan for everything, who kept pushing and climbing no matter the cost. What happened to her? I used to think I had everything figured out. Now, there was just silence. Not the peaceful, meditative kind either. The kind that eats at your bones. The silence that seeps in when you're awake at 3 a.m. and you can't stop thinking about how you got here. The silence that makes you question the lies you told yourself to keep going. The silence that haunts you with the whispers of your own insecurities. I wasn't scared of being broke. I was terrified of being forgotten, of being nothing. I spent hours staring at the ceiling of a dilapidated motel room, the hum of the ancient air conditioner my only companion. Every plan I'd ever made had dissolved into a pile of dust. I had nothing left. No job, no future. And the worst part? The betrayal of my own ambition. I had thought I was climbing, but really I'd been digging myself deeper into a pit. And now, I was stuck in it. I didn't even know who I was anymore. The woman who had been driven by success, by accolades, by the approval of others, she was gone. And in her place, someone empty, someone lost. But somewhere in all that silence, a voice started whispering again. At first, it was faint. So faint I wasn't sure if I had imagined it, but the more I listened, the clearer it became. You're not finished. It was the first thought that felt like mine in weeks. You're not done yet. I clung to that voice. It wasn't hope. It was survival. I didn't know where it would lead me, but I knew one thing. I was still breathing, and I still had a fire inside me. Even if I couldn't feel it at the moment, it was there, waiting. And for the first time in days, I stood up. Not because I had answers, not because I had a plan, but because I had to. Because the silence was no longer going to suffocate me. I wasn't out of the hole yet. Hell, I hadn't even figured out how to climb. But I was done letting it swallow me whole. And that, in itself, was the beginning of something new. I spent days in that motel room, surrounded by scraps of paper and a half-broken laptop. The silence still pressed against me, but now there was something else. Something faint but undeniable. A flicker of possibility. It started with one book, a tattered copy of The Lean Startup I found in a thrift shop for $1. It wasn't a manual on how to fix everything, but it offered something better. The idea that failure wasn't the end, that I could start over. Again. The book felt like a lifeline in the sea of my thoughts, and I clung to it like a drowning person. I devoured it in a single night, scribbling notes, cross-referencing ideas, building a mental map of what I could do with the scraps I had left. The spark of rebirth was fragile but real, and it was the only thing keeping me from sinking. I started reading everything I could get my hands on: business, self-help, psychology, even biographies of people who had hit rock bottom and risen from it. The more I read, the more I realized how much I'd been living in a bubble of my own making. I'd believed I had to play by someone else's rules, that I had to climb the ladder their way. But I didn't need them. I could create something entirely new. One afternoon, a name popped up in an old newsletter I'd subscribed to: Liam Walker, a former entrepreneur turned venture capitalist, now mentoring those in the trenches of failure. He was known for finding diamonds in the rough. I didn't know if I was a diamond or a piece of coal, but I had nothing to lose. I sent an email. Short. Director. Raw. I didn't try to make myself sound polished because I wasn't. I was broken. And somehow, I thought that might be exactly what he needed to see. His response came 2 days later. Meet me at the coffee shop on 5th and Maple. Let's see if you're willing to burn. I showed up, heart pounding, hoping I wouldn't choke. And when I walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. Liam Walker was older than I imagined, graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His presence was commanding, but it wasn't his wealth or success that drew me in. It was his quiet confidence that seemed to say, "I've been there too." We didn't talk much about my past, and that was a relief. Instead, we talked about the future. He didn't ask for a polished pitch or a slick presentation. He asked questions I hadn't thought to ask myself. "What do you want to build?" he asked, staring into me as if trying to see if my answers were genuine. I swallowed hard, the words catching in my throat. I'd never said them out loud before. I want to build something that's mine, something that can't be taken from me. I want to make a dent in the world in my own way. His eyes softened. "Then start. It's not going to be easy, and it's going to cost you everything. But if you really want it, I'll back you." That conversation changed everything. I didn't have money. I didn't have a product. But I had a burning desire and a mentor who saw something in me. I went home that night and created my first business plan. Not perfect, not refined, but enough to get me moving. I worked quietly, reading, building, taking tiny steps each day. The hours were long and the doubts crept in like old friends, but I was done being afraid. Then, a small victory. A freelance gig from a startup I'd reached out to, a modest payment, but a foot in the door. I used the money to pay for a website, a domain, and a business license. I took another small step, a loan from a friend. Not much, but enough to keep me afloat while I started to build. It was all I had, but it was mine. I looked at the figures on my screen late one night, exhaustion heavy in my bones, and I realized something. This was real. I was building something. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And it was growing. I stood up, feeling the weight of everything that had come before, everything that had broken me, but also everything that had led me here. I whispered to the empty room, my voice steady but fierce. "I won't come back. I'll rise beyond their reach." The people who had discarded me, the ones who had thought I was nothing, they wouldn't matter in the end. This was my time now. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to thrive, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me again. Momentum doesn't feel like a wave. It feels like sweat. It feels like your back aching from 12 hours in a borrowed chair. It feels like watching your bank balance shrink while your idea, still half-formed, claws its way into existence. I lived on caffeine, grit, and whatever frozen meals I could heat up in the motel's microwave. Every morning began with a notebook and a timer. 20 minutes of journaling. 40 minutes of market research. I studied customer pain points like an anthropologist in the wild. Nights were longer. Wireframes, pitch decks, dozens of cold emails that went nowhere. And then, one night, one didn't. It was a mid-sized logistics company looking for a digital solution to streamline their fractured fleet communication. Nothing sexy, nothing headline-worthy, but it was real. And more importantly, it was mine. They signed on for a 6-week contract, a pilot. I charged less than I should have. I needed the win more than the money. But the moment the wire transfer landed, I stared at the confirmation screen and whispered, "It's working." Piece by piece, I built. I rebranded everything under a new name, Vera Slate. It wasn't just a company name. It was me, reborn. A name clean of corporate history, free from every betrayal, every whisper behind my back. Vera meant truth. Slate was the clean surface I'd been handed, whether I wanted it or not. If I was going to rise, I'd do it without the old scars dictating my identity. Under that name, I created the shell of what would become the machine, a hybrid platform that would use machine learning to solve back-end inefficiencies for mid-sized businesses, logistics, scheduling, real-time communication. It wasn't sexy. That's why it would work. Everyone else was too busy chasing trends. I was quietly building the infrastructure under their feet. My first client came from the unlikeliest source, a former colleague still at my old company, disillusioned and fed up with the same politics that had buried me. She called, whispering into the phone like we were plotting something criminal. "I saw what you're doing. I believe in it. And I'm ready to jump." She brought a mid-level account with her. I didn't poach. I didn't have to. They chose to follow. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was the beginning of a migration. Each deal added fuel. I poured every cent back into the business. No luxuries, no distractions. I lived like a monk with a mission. My wardrobe shrank to black t-shirts and jeans. My social life was non-existent. Friday nights were for debugging code and tightening proposals. I missed birthdays, weddings, sleep. I didn't care. I wasn't rebuilding my life. I was designing it. And through it all, I kept a whiteboard above my desk. On it, 5 words in thick black ink. They won't see me coming. Because they wouldn't. I didn't need headlines or applause. I needed leverage. And leverage, I learned, is built quietly. One data point at a time. One loyal client at a time. One connection, one deal. One sleepless night after another. Behind the scenes, I refined my long-term play. I studied every weakness of my old company. Their bloated CRM. Their outdated systems. The slow bleed of talent they tried to hide behind glossy branding. I mapped it out, quietly assembling a plan not just to compete, but to outpace, outlast, and eventually replace them. I wasn't driven by revenge anymore. Not really. I was driven by something colder, cleaner, purpose. Late one night, with the city asleep outside my window and my second server finally stable, I allowed myself one small smile. Vera Slate wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building something they'd never understand until it was too late. And the best part? I wasn't rushing. I was patient, strategic, focused. The machine I was building didn't roar. It hummed. And one day soon, when the timing was right, it would roar loud enough to shake everything they thought was untouchable. The headlines were subtle at first. Leadership shakeup at Halberd Corporation. Internal delays threaten product launch. Sources cite internal culture strain. I read them the way some people sip wine. Slow. Savoring. Not because I needed revenge, but because I understood what they didn't yet. The ground beneath them was shifting. And I was the one holding the lever. Vera Slate's early wins had turned into whispers in boardrooms. Mid-tier contracts that should have defaulted to the big players were quietly coming to me. A few consultants crossed the line, bringing industry secrets with them. Not because I asked, but because they saw something real, a future, one that wasn't rotting from the inside. But the best part? They had no idea who they were losing to. I watched my former company scramble, trying to pivot, to innovate, to patch the holes in their once bulletproof facade. I saw the panic behind their new press releases, the forced smiles in CEO interviews. It was all unraveling, and not in a single moment, but in a slow, inevitable collapse. I didn't reach out. I didn't need to. Let them wonder. Let them feel the cold breath of a competitor they couldn't name. They'd spent years thinking I was disposable, invisible. That was their first mistake. Their second was thinking I'd ever come back, looking for validation. The truth? I didn't want a seat at their table anymore. I was building a new one they'd beg to sit at someday, one that wouldn't have room for them. Then, one afternoon, I saw him, Marcus, my ex-CEO, standing in line at a downtown cafe. Phone in hand, jaw tight, eyes distant. I was 2 people back. He didn't see me. Or maybe he did and didn't recognize me. The haircut, the sharper eyes, the confidence I wore now like armor. For a moment, we stood there, close enough to speak, to make a scene, to remind him who I was, but I didn't. I met his gaze as he glanced up just for a second. No words, no smile, just silence, heavy, deliberate, undeniable. His eyes narrowed, trying to place me. But the moment passed. He turned back to his phone, oblivious to the storm he'd helped create, and I stepped forward, ordered my coffee, and walked away. He didn't know it, but the ghost he'd buried had stopped haunting. She was walking free now, and she had fire in her wake. It started with a whisper, the same way empires always begin to fall. One of Halberd Corp's largest clients, a Fortune 100 logistics giant, quietly terminated their renewal. No public statement, no dramatic press release, just silence and then a redirection of funds to me. They didn't know Vera Slate was me. Not at first. Our dealings were clean, professional, strategic. We weren't pitching a rebellion. We were offering efficiency, clarity, and results, something Halberd hadn't delivered in years. When the news finally reached them, it wasn't the loss that hurt most. It was the confusion. Why her? They asked. Why them? I watched it unfold from my office, a modest space, but mine, the walls lined with whiteboards full of strategy. My CTO, a woman they'd passed over twice for promotion, stood beside me when the official contract was signed. We didn't celebrate with champagne. We didn't post anything flashy. We just got back to work. Meanwhile, cracks widened in their armor. An internal investigation leaked to the press. A whistleblower surfaced, confirming what we already knew. Halberd had cut corners, ignored compliance protocols, buried employee grievances. Their legal department scrambled. Shareholders called emergency meetings. The media began asking questions no one had the spine to answer. Then came the boardroom implosion. The same mentor who'd once told me I was too emotional for leadership was now cornered in a crisis meeting, his voice cracking under the weight of failing quarterly projections and regulatory fallout. Video of him leaving the building early, red-faced, eyes hollow, made the rounds in investor group chats. I didn't smile, but I remembered. I remembered the day they escorted me out of the building like a liability, the way no one met my eyes. I remembered the sick feeling of being erased like I'd never mattered. I remembered Marcus saying, "You'll bounce back," like my career was a toy they'd dropped and expected someone else to pick up. And now, those same people were trying to understand how the rules had changed. But they hadn't changed. I just learned how to use them. They started losing the game the moment they taught me how to play it, the moment they taught me where the pressure points were, what loyalty meant in business, how to read a room, how to disappear into the background, how to build in silence until no one could stop the momentum. Flashbacks came uninvited, not to haunt, but to clarify. The glass office where I once stood, humiliated and silenced, now mirrored in reverse, as one of their senior executives sat across from me asking for a role. No arrogance, no ego, just desperation. I hired her, not out of pity, because she was good, and because I wanted to teach her what real leadership looked like, the kind that grows people, not buries them. As Halberd's stock wavered and their name began to rot in headlines, I kept building. Quietly, methodically. The machine I'd envisioned had evolved, now a scalable ecosystem, absorbing their market share like a tide rising under a crumbling pier. I never gloated. I didn't need to. Some storms roar, others move like shadows, reshaping the land after the damage is done. Mine did both. I hadn't seen him in over a year. Not since the day he vanished without a word, taking the apartment, the promises, and whatever scraps of loyalty he still had left. I'd stopped wondering why he didn't reach out. I already knew the answer. I was only valuable to him when I was shining, when he could stand next to me and absorb the glow. The moment the light dimmed, so did his love. So when he showed up at my office unannounced, tired, thinner, dressed in a suit that didn't quite fit anymore, I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, voice too soft, too calculated. I leaned back in my chair. "Talk then." He stepped into the room slowly as if crossing a battlefield. "I've been following your progress. Vera Slate. That's you, right?" He smiled like it was some kind of inside joke. I didn't return it. He continued. "I made mistakes. I know that now. Things got complicated. But I never stopped believing in you. I've always said you had something rare." I watched him carefully. The subtle shift in tone, the desperate reach cloaked in flattery. He wasn't here out of guilt. He was here because he saw the tide turning, and he was trying to swim to higher ground. "I've lost a lot," he added, voice cracking at just the right moment. "You were the one thing I got wrong. Maybe we could—" "No." He blinked. "No to what?" "No to all of it." He took a step closer. "Look, I know I handled things poorly, but we were good together. You can't tell me none of it meant anything." I studied his face. The charm was still there. Only now, it looked like a trick pulled one too many times. I remembered all the little betrayals, the lies, the cold silences, the way he shifted blame like water avoiding cracks. I remembered the way he watched me collapse and chose not to catch me. "I'm not angry," I said, standing. "I just don't need this story anymore. You were a chapter. That's all." He flinched, but I wasn't finished. "You didn't love me," I said, calmly. "You loved the idea of me until I made you uncomfortable, until I made you feel small." His lips parted, but nothing came out. Then the line, the one I'd never rehearsed but had somehow always known I'd say. "You don't get to miss the woman you abandoned before she became herself." Silence, the kind that suffocates. He stood there, exposed, reaching for a version of me that no longer existed. I watched him realize that, not with fury or triumph, but with total stillness. He tried one last time, voice barely above a whisper. "You really won't even look back?" I turned to the window. Outside, the city buzzed, the life I had built pulsing just beneath the glass. My team was growing. The product was scaling. The empire I once thought I needed to beg for had been reborn in my own hands. "No," I said. "There's nothing behind me worth seeing." I walked past him without pause. No hug, no tears, no second glance. He was the ghost now, and I didn't believe in hauntings anymore. It didn't happen overnight, but when it happened, it was impossible to ignore. The skyline had changed, not because of a single tower or headline, but because of 1,000 quiet decisions that reshaped the foundations beneath it. What we built at Vera Slate wasn't flashy. It didn't scream for attention. It functioned. Clean, scalable, relentless. Entire industries began to pivot around us. Logistics, operations, workforce analytics. The same sectors that once dismissed me as too young, too emotional, not seasoned enough, were now adapting to our model or bleeding market share trying to resist it. We didn't just disrupt, we redesigned. And I didn't do it for revenge. That was too small, too temporary. I did it because I could, and because no one expected me to. That was my edge. Invisibility, followed by inevitability. Meanwhile, the old empire crumbled. Halberd Corp had become a cautionary tale, used in business school lectures and op-eds on failed leadership. The executives who once silenced me were now silent themselves, retired, disgraced, or swallowed by obscurity. Their names still appeared in news alerts from time to time, but only as footnotes. The louder they had been, the faster they faded. And those who had once whispered behind my back, They were now asking for meetings, introductions, partnerships. Some even pretended they'd supported me all along. I didn't call them out. I didn't need to. Power didn't need permission or explanations. In boardrooms, my name held weight. In venture circles, my strategy was studied. In investor roundtables, people asked, "What's Vera building next?" Not if we'd succeed, how far we'd go. Still, I kept the company grounded. My team didn't operate like kings. We worked, we listened, we earned it over and over. Success became our standard, humility, our weapon. And every so often I would walk past the old building, the one they'd fired me from. It was still there, a little more worn, a little less relevant, a relic. Most of the people inside had changed, but the weight of what had happened there would always echo in its halls. I didn't resent it anymore. That place had broken me, yes, but it also revealed me. Without it, I might have stayed smaller, more obedient. A name buried in someone else's vision. I might have spent a lifetime climbing a ladder only to find it was leaning against the wrong wall, but instead, I fell. And then I built. Not out of rage, not out of vengeance, out of purpose. Now, when I look out my window, 10 floors higher than my old office ever was, I don't see trophies. I see movement. I see the teams I've raised, the lives we've changed, the legacy we're still shaping. I used to want to prove them wrong. Now, I don't even think about them, because I wasn't their victim. I was their architect. The room is quiet now. No buzzing phones. No strategy calls. No crisis meetings. Just the soft hum of the city below and the gentle creak of the old chair I never replaced, not because I couldn't, but because some things are worth keeping as reminders. Across the skyline, steel and glass catch the light in all directions. I've watched the city change, not from a distance, but as one of its architects. Not the kind with blueprints, but the kind who builds systems, cultures, movements. The kind who rewires what people think is possible. The company runs itself these days not because I stepped away, but because I built it to outlive me. Every department, every leader, every decision maker, cultivated, not controlled. That was always the point, not to be the face, but to be the foundation. Quiet power lasts longer. I spend more time in my study now, reading, writing, mentoring founders who remind me of myself, not the polished version people see today, but the raw, desperate one who once stood outside a building with a cardboard box and a broken heart. They come to me looking for strategy, but what they really need is permission to start over, to trust themselves, to let go of what broke them. And I give them that, not with bravado, with truth. Because legacy isn't in headlines. It's in people, in the way your choices ripple beyond your lifetime, in the companies that value integrity over image, in the young women who now walk into boardrooms without flinching. Not because I cleared the path for them, but because I showed them it could be done. Sometimes I wonder what they'd say. The ones who underestimated me, the ones who tried to bury me. But the thought never stays long. Their voices are gone now. Their relevance burned out years ago. They don't matter anymore. What matters is what came after, what grew from the ashes. I'm not angry. I'm not hungry for revenge. I'm simply here, whole, unshakable, free. They thought they had taken everything from me. In reality, they handed me something far more valuable, the chance to become who I was always meant to be. And in that stillness, I remember the beginning, the HR letter, the silence, the fall. They thought it was the end of my story. They thought they were ending a game, but they wrote me off as a pawn, and pawns don't rebuild the board.